We'll hear from witnesses who will
on Capitol Hill, members of the Senate Judiciary Committee heard a first-hand account from a law student from New York.
What you saw at Columbia and at Barnard was a tragedy. This happened a week ago when students took over a building.
One expert told senators anti-Semitism in this country has grown.
Jew hatred is now spreading beyond the campuses. We're seeing it spread to workplaces, the healthcare industry, the publishing industry, and more.
While another expert testified the Jewish community is facing a staggering amount of targeted hatred.
The latest FBI data shows that Jewish Americans, which account for about 2% of our population, were targeted in nearly 60% of all religious hate crimes, a nearly 20% jump from the previous year.
When pressed on which universities are the worst in terms of anti-Semitism by Senator Mike Lee, one witness called out some of the nation's most elite.
How much time do you have? Ivy League school is to blame.
President Trump has taken action, signing an executive order called Additional Measures to Combat Anti-Semitism in January. The president addressed foreign protesters yesterday, saying agitators will be imprisoned or permanently sent back to the country from which they came. In Washington, Mike Emanuel, Fox News.
For more on this, let's bring in Kenneth Marcus, who also testified in last week's Senate hearing. He's the founder and chairman of the Brandeis Center and served as Assistant Secretary of Education for Civil Rights during the first Trump term. Thanks very much for being with us, Kenneth. So what do you give us your opinion on what the president has said is going to happen if universities continue to allow these anti-Israel protests, illegal protests, he says, they're going to find themselves stripped of federal funding. Effective, in your view?
What we're seeing now is the most effective response from the federal government to campus anti-Semitism in many decades. What we're seeing from the Trump administration is not just dealing with Columbia University or the other 9 institutions that are also on their list, but a clear signal that universities around the country need to respond and change the way they're responding, or they too will be next. This is a wake-up call that they need to listen to.
Yeah, so many of them didn't seem to care much that those protests were underway and really disrupting student life. I mean, there were Jewish students at Columbia who said they were fearful for their lives just going to class.
Let's be clear, when we call these activities protests, we're in some ways being too generous, because protests can involve political speech, which is constitutionally protected. But what we're seeing now is criminal activity. We're seeing assault and battery, we're seeing vandalism, we're seeing trespass, we're seeing agitators coming on board. Allegedly, what we're seeing can include distribution of terrorist activity materials. This is much worse than just an ordinary protest. This should be considered a crisis and an emergency at every university campus that's seeing it.
What do you know about this Mahmoud Khalil? He was one of the leaders of the protests at Columbia and has now been arrested by ICE agents. What do you know about him?
This man has allegedly been distributing materials from the Hamas Media Center. So we're talking, if the allegations are true, not just about leading a rambunctious protest. We're talking about someone who is allegedly serving as what might be called a conduit for the work of a terrorist organization. That might be considered to be a felony under federal law, as well as a basis for revocation of his visa. To agitators coming on this is a serious matter. Universities should not wait for law enforcement to show up on their doors. They should be making sure that when this is happening, that they are coordinating closely with law enforcement.
He has an attorney, as you might imagine, now that he's been arrested, and here's what she has to say. She says, last night, ICE agents wrongfully arrested Mahmoud Khalil, claiming his student visa was revoked, even though Mahmoud is a legal permanent resident, green card, and not in the U.S. on a student visa. Confronted with that fact, the ICE agents detained him anyway. ICE's arrest and detention of Mahmoud follows the U.S. government's open repression of student activism and political speech, specifically targeting students at Columbia University for criticism of Israel's assault on Gaza. The U.S. government has made clear they will use immigration enforcement as a tool to suppress that speech. Open repression of student activism, she said. Kenneth, how do you see it?
all over the place. Speech is not what the Trump administration task force is talking about. What we're talking about is criminal activity at activities that begin as protests, but that also include harassment. They include vandalism. They include shunning of students. They include disruption of university activities. And in some cases, they may include material support for terrorism. That is not the sort of thing that is protected under the First Amendment. That is the sort of activity that any university should be considering an emergency, and they should be cooperating closely with law enforcement.
So would you advocate for deportation of this particular individual?
Depending on the circumstances of the individual, it's either deportation or potentially prosecution under federal laws.
Kenneth Marcus from the Brandeis Center. Kenneth, thank you.
Thank you.